Good morning, good evening, good afternoon for everyone. This is podcast Happy at Work. My name is Tatiana. In our podcast, we meet with experts from with different parts of the world and discuss the people-centered approach for doing our business. And today, my guest will discuss a topic which is really inspiring me. It's connections and connectivity at work and how it could influence the employee engagement, productivity, retention, and so on. Hi, Jason.
How are you? Glad to be here.
Jason, thanks for joining us. And usually, before we starting to answer the questions, before this, could you tell a little bit more about your background? I know what you are one of the person who are included on the rating of the top HR influencer in the world, but I think I could add some more important things about you, and that people will inspire to follow you later on LinkedIn.
Sure. Well, professionally, I am the CEO of the Connected Performance Group. We operate as advisors to CEOs and leadership teams who want to elevate performance within their organization, but do it in a way that doesn't burn people out, doesn't use people up, that's sort of good for people and good for the organization. So for the last 20 plus years of my life, I have been studying employee engagement, leadership, performance, and a variety of other things in the workplace. And so that's kind of what led me to this path to really want to help organizations build better places to work.
Important. It's about connectivity, about connection at work. How could you define it, and why it's important for the organization?
So it's a great question, and I'm going to take a second, if it's okay, to unpack that a little bit, because my work is really centered around the power of connection at work. And that started actually, well, it probably started very early on, I think, in my career. I think I always had a sense of a feeling of how important feeling connected or relationships were to being able to get work done. And that's early on in my career. Even when I was first in sales, I think I kind of had a sense for that. In fact, my first book that was published clear back in 2012 was about the power of relationships in our lives, right? How to use relationships or leverage relationships to be successful and happy. So I always understood the power of relationships. What I didn't have a full grasp on until later, this is probably 10 or 12 years ago, was that when I was working with a tech organization leading a best places to work team, where we were measuring kind of employee sentiment across a whole bunch of different organizations to determine which places were the best places to work. What I noticed was that the things that were consistently sort of the highest in terms of the drivers of employee engagement and satisfaction and those kinds of things were things that we normally talk about in relationships, things like feeling valued and trusted and appreciated and cared for and included and those kinds of things. And through that work, I started to realize like that employees experience work as a relationship. And just like any other important relationship in their life, they need the same kinds of things from that relationship in order for it to be healthy, in order for you to want to give your most to it. I need to feel those things, right? You trusted and cared for, included, appreciated, all those things. And so I understood that was kind of the first insight, is that work is a relationship for employees. That's how they experience it. And the strength of that relationship is really driven by how connected I feel. And so connection is sort of the strength or the energy, power, force of the relationship. The relationship is sort of how it exists. And so I would say it starts like, so when I say, like, if we're defining it, we have to understand that work is a relationship. And then connection itself, at least the way that we define connection in our work, is connection is it's feeling engaged with something that is important to you, something that matters to you. It's sort of a feeling of meaningful engagement with that. And so, and that can be people, it can be bigger than people too, which is something we discovered recently through our research. So that's what it is when we talk about connection at work.
Mm. At first, it's about relationship. It's also about meaning of work. And I remember one of the guests of my podcast, Tracy Brower, we discussed the importance of relationship. But now, in the current world, another way, we have a lot of problems, a lot of challenges when we talk about this connection. And
Mm.
my question for now, we are living in a world where some people could come to the office, some people work in hybrid model, and other people work remotely. What influence or type of work have their sense of connections, or their sense of engagement work?
Where you're working. Yeah. So I guess this is a really interesting question, right? Because the predominant kind of discussion, I think, around work for the last, I mean, if let's set AI aside, right? We get to take a break from talking about AI today, or at least for most of it, right? We're going to set that aside for a minute. Other than AI, the predominant discussion over the last 6 years, certainly since COVID arrived in our lives, was, what does remote work do to us as people at work, right? Do we how does it change how we feel? Does it change whether we feel connected? Does it change the quality of work? Does it change how engaged we feel? We just published some research that you've referenced 18 months ago. We call it the Human Connection Study, and it was born out of wanting to understand more about connection at work. I was unsatisfied with what we knew about it, or sort of what the research. It seems like there was pockets of really interesting research and insights, but I hadn't seen something that was more broadly helping us understand, like, what exactly is connection at work, and what impact does it have, and how does it actually happen? What can we do? And so we did this study. Happened in a couple phases. It ultimately ended up including over survey responses from over 285,000 employees across the United States predominantly. And so it's a pretty big data set that we looked into. Is which group of people, those that work fully remote, those that work fully on-site, or those that work some kind of hybrid situation in the middle. We looked at connection levels, obviously, across those, because we were curious. And we actually were, at least I was surprised by what we found. But what we found was that the most highly disengaged group, so the group that had the highest rate of disengagement, was actually non-management employees working fully on site, which I don't think is what anyone expects, right? That's been the headline that people are like, wait a minute, what? And then to compound the confusion that people have, the highest rate of connection, so the largest percentage of connected employees, were actually those working fully remote. Now, some people, I guess, take that and sort of want to sort of stretch that in to say, see, remote's better than fully on site. And I don't think that's what it means at all. I think what it signaled to us was that I think this conversation about what it means to feel connected is not, like, it's more complicated than what we think. I think I went in thinking that connection was primarily about people to people relationships. And I think that's largely what people assume it's about. What we found in our data is that it's broader than that, right? There's a few different types of connection, and then there's even a factor that kind of mitigates connection depending on the degree to which we experience it. But what it suggests is that connection's more complicated, or more complex, I think, than we thought. There's more going on there. I also would say that the biggest, I think, headline is that we assume that, I think a lot of leaders assume that proximity, physical proximity, right, being in the same place together, that by itself is enough to create connection. And the thing that we miss is that we've known for decades that that's not true, because, I mean, working in the office, for most of human history, working in offices has sucked, right? They're not designed for people. To your point, happy at work, people working like, that look like they're, prairie dogs or chipmunks in sort of rows of cubicles where they never talk to anybody all day long and are ignored and nobody pays attention to them and all that. Like those people, they're not happy. They're not connected. We've known that that's a bad experience. You can make it better, but just bringing people back into a bad experience or a disconnected place doesn't make them connected. And so what we've learned, I think what this says is that the path to connection isn't just about proximity. Proximity might help if you put people together and then you create an experience, right? Said it's an experience of meaningful engagement with something that matters to you. If you create opportunities for meaningful engagement, sure, coming into the office can absolutely fuel connection, but guess what? You can create meaningful engagement from a distance too. You can use these great video tools we have to create meaningful engagement. And so it's really about the intention with which you engage with people and you create opportunities for people to connect to each other and engage with each other. That's where connection happens. And so it's an interesting finding that I think I like it because it helps us get people's attention to have a deeper conversation about what this work is really about.
And my next question is about sense of meaning. From the happiness side perspective, the sense of meaning and meaning of life, meaning of work is very important to feel yourself more happier. It's from research of Martin Seligman and other researchers in positive psychology field. So the sense of meaning is very important also from the perspective of engagement or connection. What could you recommend to the companies? How to cultivate the sense of meaning at work?
Well, let me talk a little bit about what one of the other kind of surprising findings that sets up right to answering this question is, when we, the first kind of surprise finding was that remote workers are more connected. So then that's like, well, wait a minute, there's something more going on here. And one of the things that surfaced pretty early on in the research, in phase 1 of our research, which was a little more qualitative, was that while we assumed that connection was primarily about our connection, like our relationships with other people, what we found in the research was that when we asked people to describe experiences when they felt fully, really connected, when they really felt connected, either in their personal life or at work, they would talk about relationships, absolutely, connection with people, but just as often, they would talk about experiences where, they would say things like, or describe like contributing to something bigger than themselves, or being part of a cause, or doing something that felt important and was contributing. And so there was a sense of connection that was coming from being a part of something or feeling a part of something that was purposeful or meaningful to them. And so what we ended up calling that, what we realized is that there were 2 types of connection that were happening, and that are, at least what it looked like, both were very important, and both are kind of part of the overall pie. When we say if we feel connected, usually both of those are at play. One is what we call relational connection, which is our connection with other people, but the other side is resonance connection, which is what you were talking about. It showed up, and resonance connection is our connection to meaning and significance at work. And so what we found was that there was actually 2 types of resonance connection going on. One is the kind that I think if we're talking about it, we're usually talking about this, which is, does my work feel important? Does it feel like my work matters? Do I have a feeling of connection to the work that I do? And can I sort of see that it is contributing to something or someone or making things better? And so that's one part of it, is that's, if I have that, then I have what we call personal resonance, which is this resonant connection with my work. But the other one, which I thought was more surprising, is what we called organizational resonance from in the survey, which is, do I feel connected to the direction and purpose of the organization? And this one, interestingly, at least in our data set, was the most powerful type of connection in terms of predicting the kinds of performance outcomes and engagement outcomes that we're after at work. Things like motivation, things like feeling included, feeling, or having an intention to stay, right? Not thinking about looking for another job, all of that. When you have high organizational resonance, it makes it very much more likely that you are also like more motivated, you feel included, you feel like your work is meaningful, you want to stick around, or you're not thinking about leaving. That's incredibly powerful. So what that says is, yes, relationships at work, super important in terms of as a source of connection, but also this meaning and significance, feeling connected to my work and feeling connected to the organization, may be as powerful or more powerful. And so what it says about what we should do, to your question, is, as an organization, one of the things that's really important, and this is a lot of the work that we do through our organization, is you have to make sure that you are telling a clear story about where you are going and why it matters. So the leadership team at the top needs to be clear on what is our strategy and how are we telling that story, and are we telling that story in a way that people can connect to in their job? Are we telling a compelling story about why our organization exists, how we impact our clients, or how we impact the world, and do people understand that, and can they resonate, can they connect to that story? So that's one, is you have to be clear on that work. Direction and purpose has to be clear, because if it's not clear and accessible, then nobody can ever connect to it, right? And that's a big point. This is also, by the way, organizational resonance, most powerful driver also, or the most powerful predictor, also the least commonly experienced type of connection. So this is a big opportunity, is getting this clear. And then the other thing I would say is, as managers, or if you are thinking about how to set up your managers to support people, teach them how to have conversations with people when they're setting goals or when they're doing coaching about why the work they're doing, or how the work they're doing, is contributing to the team's goals, the department's goals, the organization's goals. Because if you can connect the dots there, or how their work is impacting the customer, and if you can help them see that and feel that, when you create that line of sight, that has tremendous impact on the individual and how connected they feel. And when they feel connected, they are more motivated, they are more likely to stick around. So that would be the two things I think that are probably highest impact when it comes to that dimension of connection.
Could you recommend to organization how it should prepare their leaders for this conversation, for improving the sense of connection of the employees?
Well, there's a layer of things. I think if I think about, so I'm gonna distinguish between leader and manager, because leader, when I use the word leader, I'm talking sort of more senior leaders, those that sort of are in a place to shape kind of organizational policy, organizational process, shape culture, that sort of thing. At a leadership level, the role of the leader, and this is the thing about connection that's also, I think, important to understand, is that you can't like give people connection, right? The work of connection is about creating the conditions for connection to flourish, for connection to happen. I can create an environment where connection can flourish, and you can connect and feel connected, but I can't sort of make you feel connected. I can't just give that to you directly. And so the work of leaders is thinking about, how do we build kind of an infrastructure of connection within our organization? And so what that looks like is, like I mentioned earlier, how are we number one, as a leadership team, at the top, are we setting a clear, do we have clear strategy? Are we telling a clear story about where we're going? Are we clear about mission and purpose? Are we clear about our values? Those kinds of things. Are we sending a clear message? Are we then role modeling sort of what that looks like? Are we role modeling what our values look like in action? Is there a consistent sense of, okay, this is what we're saying about where we're going and how we're going to get there? Can I see that and connect to that as an employee through the behavior of my leader, from the actions of my leader? So that's really important, right? Getting leadership aligned and clear on that, and then sort of modeling it is one. Two is then thinking about organizationally, it's equipping your managers with the skills they need so that they can foster connection. And that is, managers are a linchpin. Managers, in what and I think we've known this, no surprise that managers are really important, but our data really made it clear that, especially when it comes to connection, is that a good manager is like, let me back up and say that the way we describe what I think in one sentence our data suggests is that connection is the energy of performance. So when the organization is connected, a connected organization is a high performing organization. That is, those two things are true. But here's the problem: in a disconnected organization is likely not performing up to its potential. It's probably stuck or struggling in a lot of different ways. The manager is kind of at the intersection where, if connection is the energy of performance, a manager basically can either plug you in or they can basically cut the cord. And so a good manager needs to have some key skills. They need to understand how to listen in a way, like listen and engage with people in a way that makes them feel heard and understood. Because that is one of the key things we found in terms of the way people individually describe sort of what it feels like to feel connected in a relational sense is, I feel like I'm seen. Like, I feel like this person is seeing me as an individual, as who I am, and they understand me. They hear me and understand me. And so teaching our managers to really listen and understand people, which is, active listening plus kind of some skills relative to really mining for understanding, mining for like what it is that's going on kind of even deeper than what's being communicated, to really build that connection and see people. And also equipping them with, like what we talked about earlier, how do you have conversations, coaching conversations to help people connect to meaning in their work, right? Because they can make or break that. The manager is right at that intersection, so they can make or break that. Your managers need to be able to sort of carry the water and tell the story of the organizational path. And so they need to be able to articulate sort of, they have to feel connected to that strategy so that then they can tell the story to their people and connect them to where we're going. The manager also is in a position to create space for people to connect to each other. Peer connection, our connection to our colleagues, is incredibly powerful. It's one of the two types of peer connection or relational connection that showed up as really important: your connection to your peers and your connection to your manager. And so the manager is in a place to create space for people to get to know each other. And so as a manager, equipping them with some techniques and tactics for number one, how do I get to know my people better, right? As human beings, just really humanize them. But then also, how do I create space within my team for people to get to know each other as human beings, for that connection to foster and build and create. And so those would be kind of the key, levers, I would say, that you can pull that would have the biggest immediate impact around increasing connection. And if you do that, that has cascading effects for increasing engagement, increasing retention, increasing performance. So that connection is a sort of upstream set of levers you can pull to open up sort of the performance capacity of the organization.
Jason, it's very interesting. What now we discussed the different skills which you really need now. The real manager to be a storyteller about organization, about strategy, to be a facilitator of the team, to be a coach for every person and the team. But I want to ask you one more question. It's a question based also on a second surprise from your report, which you shared with me before our conversation. It's about impact on the performance. With which type of employees we try to work deep, the employees we try to engage. So the biggest surprise for me was sometimes we try to engage the employee who feel a very a very high level of disengagement. Try to fix it with them. But as I remember from your report, and you make a correction, but it's better to focus the people who feel engaged and help them to feel more and more engaged to and feel a more strong connection with the organization. So could we discuss this? In which type of employees should they focus on for achieve the results of the organization?
Yeah, that was a really interesting finding. And it's in the only sort of language, I just want to be clear on our language, we were specifically measuring connection, which connection is highly correlated with engagement, we found through the research. But specifically with connection is, most of the time, and I think this has been true, especially in the remote work kind of world, remote and hybrid, is we're talking about those disconnected employees. And what we were looking at was, like we're obviously we're very concerned. We have people maybe that are really disconnected. And so we spend a lot, that's where we want, our focus kind of goes. And this is much like what we've done historically with performance, right? We spend a lot of our time on those low performing employees because we're so worried about them. Time and attention goes there. And so I think that's our instinct, is go fix the end of the spectrum that is farthest away from where we want it to be. We're asking them a survey question about their connection level, and they're rating a 0 or a 1 or a 2 or whatever it is. If that's a disconnected employee, if we spend a whole bunch of energy to try to move them from being disconnected to being moderately connected, it has very limited impact on moving the needle relative to how motivated they feel, how engaged they are. Just doesn't move the needle. Taking those that feel moderately connected and moving them to highly connected is where we see a dramatic jump in terms of impact on they go from sort of moderately motivated to highly motivated. The multiple is pretty incredible. I think there's like a 35% jump between sort of moderate to high connection in terms of performance outcomes that we care about. And so what I think that suggests is do the work on, the work here is not thinking about how do we make people a little more connected. It's what levers can we pull? What work can we do? It's not a switch that we flip. It happens on a spectrum. And so let's focus on moving people that are feeling sort of connected to feeling highly connected. And if you really zero in on leadership clarity at the top, making sure that story is clear and people can connect to it, and then equipping your managers with an understanding of connection, and then with the right kinds of skills. We call them relationship first skills for how they're leading people and kind of how they're shaping their team. It feels better to lead in a connected environment. It feels better to lead through connection than it does to try to force or muscle performance out of people. That kind of management is frustrating, and it's not fun, and it's not great for people either. And so this is a win-win all the way around if you're willing to do the work.
We are close to the end of our
Absolutely.
Conversation. What 3 main tips could you give for improving the feeling of connections at work?
All right. Number one, if you're a senior leader or an executive CEO at the top of your organization, invest in getting your sort of house aligned first, right? So make sure you're telling that clear story about strategy and mission and values and what matters, and making sure you're living that and walking that, because people will then connect to that. It's like a magnet for connection. So that's one. Number two, if you're a manager, check in with your people more often, and check in a meaningful way. And Tatiana, I have a very specific method I teach called the check-in method. I will share a document with you that teaches people how to do it, that you can share if they want to do that. But check in with people with intention, so that you know what's going on with them and you get to know them as humans better. So check in more often and better. And if you are an employee, if you want your job to feel better, invest in building relationships with the people you work with. Get to know them, get to know who they are and what they care about. Set aside time to really get to know the people that you work with, because when you build that peer connection, work will feel better both for you and for them, and that will make work more fun and feel more meaningful for you. And it's a great path towards actually elevating your own sort of not only feeling of happiness and satisfaction at work, but also your own performance. So those would be my three.
Thanks a lot, Jason. Thanks a lot for participation and sharing all these insights. I think we're after this conversation, and people who will listen will have a lot of thoughts about connection and about investing the time and energy as the leaders, and what any other skills they need to develop for creating a real sense of connection with organization and with other team. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
So today in our podcast, we discuss a very interesting topic. What does it mean, a sense of connection, and what you could do for improving the sense of connection, which could be the energy for the high performance of the employees. This is podcast Happy at Work. My name is Tatiana. Stay connected.